Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Financial Advisors Want to Know podcast. I am super excited today to have Libby Greiwe with me. I've been a longtime follower of her podcast and her work and really believe in the work that she does with advisors. She creates creating a top-notch client experience that runs like clockwork is the best way to build a referable business, especially for financial advisors, attracting clients who are easier and eager to work with you. However, there's a catch. You have to execute this exceptional client experience by using an organized strategic approach. So Libby is an absolute master when it comes to this, and her work is helping financial advisors and planners create systems and processes so that they can work less, feel less overwhelmed, and build a business and life that they love. And she knows how to do this from her own experience of building and exiting a successful practice. So thank you so much for joining me today, Libby.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I am a big systems and organization geek. I love, what you do because it's something that I'm very personally passionate about. When you're dealing in complex financial information and also having to balance human relationships at the same time, processes are just essential. So I know in the pre-show we talked about having a conversation around your systematic approach to what the processes are that advisors need, and then just going through those topics and then the layers of stories of experiences that you've had with advisors. So you mentioned that there are 8 core processes. What is the first process that you usually recommend advisors start with?
Yeah, absolutely. And really the way that I look at it is kind of in the almost like the life cycle of acquiring and maintaining a relationship with a client. So it's not necessarily perfectly linear, but it starts with having a really good way of marketing. So whatever your marketing process is, having it documented, having it detailed, and doing it the same way every time. Because at least what I found, so back when I started my practice, I was doing your typical 70, 80 hours a week. And then I found out I was pregnant, right? And I knew that I could not work at that level and be the mom that I wanted to be. So ultimately wanted to get down to a 3-day work week. And like most advisors, I had been just kind of winging it, and really every single time doing it differently or going back and trying to find like an old thing and sort of copy it, and never actually stepping back and taking the time inside of my practice to truly build a business. So when we talk about those processes, right, that's what I'm talking about, is how do we actually document them, create standard operating procedures in a way that allows us to do them wash, rinse, repeat. So that first one is how you are marketing and bringing in new prospects.
Nice. And when advisors are thinking about this, because I know I love that you're starting there, because I think for a lot of, especially professional services, like if you have the marketing queued up correctly, it sets the stage for everything, the cadence of everything else to go much better. Like when you've been really intentional about the setup there. Do you have some, tips or for advisors who are like, okay, I need to actually institutionalize what I'm doing around my marketing practices, like recommendations you have and how they should approach systemizing it, or just, what your recommendation for starting that is?
Yeah, that it's kind of a tough one to start with, talking through that, because there's so many different forms of marketing. So regardless of whether you're doing webinars or live workshops or you have a YouTube channel, whatever it is that you're doing, having it in the calendar, time blocking it, creating it in batches, using it. But really the goal is to have it documented so you can outsource as much as possible. So often advisors will come to me for coaching or go through our program, and they'll think they're the only person that can do this. And I always have to challenge them, right? Like if you learned this, somebody else can learn it too. So it's a matter just of taking your brain and getting it down on paper. And there's all kinds of really great tools to help with, so there's great tech out there to help with creating SOPs and creating templates. But that was like, my story was just, we were literally winged it every time, and we did it kind of the same way ish, because that's what I remembered. But literally, like, this is the time we start, this is the agenda that we use, here's the script that I'm using for this webinar, here's how we remind people, here's how we follow up, here's how we set appointment, like literally documenting every single step.
Yeah, no, I love that, because I'm a huge fan of, we use a piece of software in the firm called Notion. And we
Mm-hmm.
do that for a lot of stuff where it's just anything that I always joke, like, if we're going to do this more than once, if we're going to do this more than like 5 times, we need to build a system around it, because otherwise it's, you'll miss a little step, or like, oh, well, I thought the other person was going to do this. And
Right.
it's just, even with like simple stuff, it's amazing. Like once you realize how many steps go into everything. So after marketing, what is the next area that you usually recommend people work on?
Yeah, so this is where my area of expertise comes into play. So the next kind of three processes that every advisory practice has, whether they're doing them intentionally or not, is your start to finish prospect to client process. So whatever the process is of from the very first moment a prospect calls into the office, responds to some of your marketing, or you do an outbound phone call, what happens next? So whatever your financial planning process is, documenting every step, creating templates and SOPs for all of the tasks so that we can start to kind of productize our service. So I like to think about our service offerings like a product, right? Like General Mills, when they create Cheerios, they know exactly how many Cheerios go in the bag, what size boxes they are going to sell, how much they're supposed to weigh, how much that little plastic bag costs, what it costs to ship it to the store and print the packaging, and how much the grocery can mark it up for. And it makes it much easier for advisors to not only sell, but it makes it really, really easy for clients to buy when they
Yeah.
understand exactly what it is, how many steps are involved, what's the goal of each step, and then what's the outcome going to look like, right? And it doesn't have to necessarily look like in terms of deliverables, but what's that ongoing relationship with the advisor going to look like? And then, of course, this to make it scalable, we have to have other people on our team executing those different parts of the process. So that's where that documentation, that's where having those templates, that's where having automations come into play. So at the Efficient Advisor, we talk about four things. We talk about automate, delegate, delete, or streamline. And so what can be automated in that process? What can be delegated? What can be streamlined through templates, checklists, etc. And then what frankly doesn't actually matter to your ideal client avatar.
Yeah, that's probably a big one. Like, I imagine there's a lot of steps that people do where it's just like, do you even need to do this? Have you found it particularly on that? Are there certain things that you see advisors like commonly bring up as something that they think is a step that needs to be in there that you usually end up deleting out or removing?
Yeah, a lot of times, especially when we get to talking about like client service model, it's funny because there's a lot of things, and I did this too as an advisor, that when we really step back and look at like, is everything I'm doing actually driving results? Is it moving the needle for the clients? Does this actually have an impact on them? There were a lot of things that I was raised in a broker dealer world to do because that's what I was trained to do, or that's what the guy in the cubicle next to me always did. And
Yeah.
stuff like it depends, but there's a lot of like like different types of touches that maybe aren't that effective, right?
Mm.
So just calling a client and saying like, hey, I just want to see how you're doing, not terribly effective. But having a targeted phone call at a set time with a valuable topic, way more impressionable, way more impactful for a client. So there's a lot of those little things, like maybe even spending oodles of time on newsletters that only have a 3% open rate.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep. Yeah. No, and it's funny. I think it's like the Pareto principle of like, it's probably that 20% of things that you're
Mhm.
doing that's driving the 80%, and just really identify that and nix the rest, because unless people are actually actively engaging with it. I always listen for like, where do I get compliments? And it's
Mhm.
like, oh,
Yes.
okay. Like if I'm getting positive, active, positive feedback from people on things or compliments on things, it's like, okay, that's what they're noticing. Um, but yeah, that's great. So then after that onboarding experience,
Yeah,
which
so we've
is
got
super
marketing and
critical.
prospecting. Then we have kind of that start to finish client. Then we have the actual process of onboarding them. So that's
Mhm.
moving the assets, transferring the money, applying for the insurances, getting them set up to work with us in our portals with their own online logins, getting them where they're super functionally working with them. So that's the third one is onboarding. Then we've got client service model. So how are we going to strategically add value to our clients year after year? How much time will that take our practice to execute? How much capacity can we serve? Are we serving our clients appropriately based on the amount of revenue that they're bringing in? Do we have it segmented properly? And are we serving them in a way that's really meaningful and impactful? Then after that, we have client experience, which client experience really is the root of all processes. Every process should be executed and looked at through the lens of what does this experience look and feel like to the client. But having our own documented client experience around the lines of what do we want our clients to feel when they're working with us? What do we want their experiences to be? And it can be as simple as looking at every interaction you have with your clients and either giving it like a little sad face, a little meh face, or a little happy face, right? And just working towards every single interaction. In my opinion, everything needs to be a happy face, right? Like our interactions with our clients are either strengthening the client relationship or moving us away from a quality client relationship. To me, there really is no in between. So how do we go through all of the steps that we're putting our clients through and try to move it towards building our brands, supporting the values that we've said that our company has, moving our clients towards their goals? How do we make every single interaction an amazing one? And that should be its own process. So that's the fifth one, is client experience.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's great. And I'm sure the next ones that you're about to get into, because my mind just goes to like, it's easy to manage some of those things when it's just you. But then once you get into a team dynamic, oversight that's the next challenge. So after that process, mapping those processes out, what's the next step?
Yeah. So the sixth one is having a referral process. So when you get that, treasured gold of a referral, having an actual process to handle the inbound part of the referral and how to properly thank the client that sent the referral to you. And also have a process for when you receive a referral that's not ideal. Right? How do we handle that? How do we communicate that to the existing client? Having a way that you do that every single time, and having it documented. Again, having people on your team handling the vast majority of this. But how do we actually handle referrals? Because a lot of advisors will say, well, I used to not charge clients and now I charge clients coming in. So do I have to let my existing client know that new clients are going to be paying a fee? And like, there's all these like things that we have floating around in our head. So having that actually documented of like, this is how we do it. This is how we talk about it. And then this is how we handle it.
Yeah, that's great. And then so after the referral process, what do you have? What do you recommend next?
Yeah, your investment process. So everybody has to have the process by which, if they're managing money, here's how we manage our portfolios. Here's how we do our due diligence. Here's how we pick and choose which funds make it into the portfolio, how we monitor them, when do we kick them out, what is our allocation process. Those all have to be documented as well.
Yeah, that's great. And then, so which number are we on now? I feel
That's
like we're
7.
rounding the bases. So what's the last piece, the cherry on top?
Yeah. So the last process is your employee experience. We spend so much time as advisors really focused on building longevity and tenure and excitement with our clients. And we want to be doing the same thing with our employees, right? We want to build longevity and tenure and excitement. And we need to have a process documented in our office about how we are going to treat our employees, how we as business owners are going to invest in them, both in their personal development and in their professional development. How do we have recognition, knowing their Colbys or their Enneagrams, and providing additional trainings and speaking to them in their employee love languages, right? And making sure that they feel appreciated. Is because it's so hard, for me, for the 16, 17 years that I ran my practice, especially only working 3 days a week. It was full bore ahead. And I hit that point where I realized, like, wow, I haven't taken the time to do some like team building activities or something fun as a group. And it was always kind of a moment for me where I'd go, oh, we haven't done that in a while, or somebody on the team would say something. And it was very retroactive. So it was establishing a very proactive strategy to making sure that we were prioritizing those types of things, that type of leadership training for staff members, getting them additional training versus being like, oh, yeah, we should do that. It was always kind of an afterthought.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because I think for a lot of the advisors that I talk to that we have in the practice, something that I notice with them is like when you're such a, to really run your own firm, you have to have such a driver personality,
Mm-hmm.
and you're having to spin so many plates at once. And then it's over time, you're professionalizing things and you're spinning fewer plates, and the plates are getting transferred over to team members. But you have, for most of them, they have such strong driver personality that it can be like that last piece of really making sure that the employee experience is what it needs to be, can be almost like the last thing on their mind, just because of that, because you're just so focused. And then at the same time, it's, I think when you're running a business and you do have that kind of driver personality, a lot of those like what feels like touchy feely just feel like they're
Right.
less important, because you're not really wired that way. Like if you're wired where you're like, yeah, I'm going to grow and build a big firm, a lot of those things that might be important to those different, like you said, like Enneagrams or Colby's or, personality types, it's going to feel pretty different for them than it does for you as the owner of the firm. So that's a really
Yeah.
good thing to
Well, and
emphasize.
it's a good kick in the pants because there's nothing more expensive than losing a key employee, right?
Yeah.
It is time consuming, it's exhausting, it's stressful, especially if you've got a full calendar and now you have to step outside and hire and onboard and train and deal just with a slower process. And it's very expensive
Yeah.
emotionally, physically, and financially.
Yeah.
So putting a little effort into building out a process to really improve employee retention is huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's something that's a reflection that can happen later on in a practice. I think when people have been in it for a while, of
Mhm.
realizing that you're in two businesses, not in one business. Like you're in the business of client acquisition, retention, and keeping the clients happy, and then it's like a separate business of doing that for employees, and realizing that
Yeah.
that's it's that's actually the model. Like that's the model challenge, is it's the talent acquisition and retention. Like that's the actual challenge. Hey there, Catherine here. Thanks for listening to the conversation. Just wanted to explain a little more about what we do. So, I'm a CPA here with Dominion. We're a tax firm that works specifically for financial advisors as they're growing and scaling their practices to help them avoid tax waste, make the right calls, and grow practices that they love. So, if you're interested in saving more, you can DM me on LinkedIn with the word guide, and I'll send you over our guide for financial advisors to scale tax efficiently, all my top tips to unlock six-figure savings. Thanks, and keep enjoying the show.
Yeah. So, what's true for most advisors is that you get into the business and you just go full bore, right? You're prospecting, you're just trying to build your business, you're doing all the things and just head down getting the work done. And most advisors are kind of have this pivotal moment, right? I call it this inflection point. And I know I had it where all of a sudden, 3, 4 years in, you're like, oh my gosh, this is great. I've built this business. Everything I prayed for has come true. I've got the revenue. I'm not worried about paying my mortgage. I'm not worried about putting food on the table anymore. Now I'm more concerned about the overwhelm that I'm experiencing and the stress that I'm under, because while I was head down building my business, I kind of didn't actually build a business. So for me, I remember realizing, wow, I don't really have a true business. I have a Libby. And it was really setting out then, like setting aside that time to actually put processes in place and build systems and do the things that allowed me to step out of parts of all of these processes so that we could continue to scale. But for me, even more importantly at that time, so that I could actually work less, have less stress, and less overwhelm.
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful way to look at it. And I think for a lot of advisors hearing this now, it's like if you haven't gone independent yet, like if you're at the point where you're like, oh, I might do this, realizing that that is the progression you're going to hit. So if you can prepare for that, you'll be saving yourself a lot of trouble in the future, realizing that you basically need to constantly be professionalizing as you go. Like instead of
Mhm.
waiting and procrastinating the professionalization of everything in the business, like do it as you're moving along and into things, which can be tough because when you're building so many things, it's like, well, how do I document my onboarding process? Like I don't know what that is yet. Like I'm
For
gonna
sure.
tinker with it like 50 times this year and keep tweaking it and changing it. But
Yeah.
do you have
I always,
recommendations?
oh,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead. I was gonna say, I
Um,
always tell advisors, like, okay, look, I have seen people come in And day one, they start trying to build all of these like really sexy processes. And at
Yeah.
the end of the day, if you don't have any clients to put through them, it really doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
to your point, you are going to try it, and it takes a while to figure out who your ideal client is and what is your DNA as a planner. Like, how do you like to plan? How do you like to do business? Because you're going to try a million different things. So like it does make sense to start outlining those things and to build, but I wouldn't go like full bore into building out all of your processes and then not have anybody to put them through.
Yeah, no, and I think too, something that I've noticed internally, like doing this as a CPA firm that's growing, something that I've really experienced is starting with the bottleneck pieces first. Like where are the bottlenecks? Like routinizing those, getting those set up, and then kind of backing into things that are kind of constantly getting tweaked and then building systems there. Do you have recommendations for, because I think a big part of this is that sounds like a lot of work putting all the processes in. Integrate, like, do you have
Mhm.
recommendations around integrating team members into this, like for people who, maybe they have a couple people working for them? Like, how do you recommend they collaborate with their team to get,
Yeah,
like playbooks and things like
you're
that done?
always going to get the best bet when you have co-creation of anything. So, I would do this all of the time. Like I'd go to a conference and I'd come back and my team would be like literally braced for impact when I blew through the door because I came back
Yeah.
with my binder filled with like 4,000 things that we're going to implement. And they would be like, okay, but why? And I remember like it became really clear to me. I wish I could remember what book this was, but it was about a founder, and she'd taken her management team to a Tony Robbins conference. And they came back from the Tony Robbins conference and they're like, company wide, we're doing this giant juice cleanse. And everyone was like, wait, what? Um, Wait, what? Like why? And she talked about like how they're all like, well, hold on. If we're all going to have explosive diarrhea together, we at least need to understand the vision and the purpose and the why behind
Yeah.
it,
Oh
right?
man.
And so, like with our group coaching, we're always asking people to bring in their ops people and to bring in their admin staff because when they understand the why and kind of the long term vision, and then back into, because there would be a lot of times that we'd be working on a process and I would say like, oh, I think this is how we should do it, and
Yeah.
my director of operations would be like, oh no, like our software doesn't work that way, this would be so much more functional, or we could circumvent that step entirely by doing it this way, right?
Yeah.
Like versus me laying it out and saying here's how it's going to go,
Yeah.
having her co-creating it with me and building out certain pieces and getting her input and making her feel like she owned parts of that process, but
Mm.
setting a very clear vision for the why and the what, so that everybody was kind of on board with, okay, because when you hand someone a process, right, all they see is extra steps and extra work,
Yeah.
and they don't necessarily see how it serves the bigger vision of the business.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Like that's something that I've really enjoyed. We implemented on our side of, like, when assignments get sent over to people, we use this thing called definition of done, where it's like, here's
Mm-hmm.
the actual outcomes that I'm looking for out of this. And so if you disagree with what you think this step is based on what I'm actually trying to get to for an outcome, then like let's talk about it instead of, hey, we need to switch this tool or we need to switch this or that. It's like, here's the problem that I think this is trying to solve. Like this is my definition of done, of when I need
Yes.
this, like what's the purpose, like, etc. So that a lot of times, like I will assign something over to a teammate of like something I think needs to go a certain way, like what you were saying, and then they say, oh no, like if you're actually just trying to change this one piece, do it this way, it's going to be way more efficient. So that's really great feedback. Are there
Yeah.
common areas that you see advisors stumble when they're trying to go through this process of professionalization, in terms of like mindset or things that you think
Yes,
really
the
hold them back?
number one killer to building processes is this idea of it has to be perfect, right?
Mm,
Like if we're going to sit down and we're going to document it and we're going to put it on paper, we need to have every step, every template, every checklist, every automation. Like it has to be absolute. So like we go from this like it's complete garbage and we have no system to it has to be absolutely perfect and there is no in between. And so it took me a long time to adopt. Like I was always an all or nothing kind of girl with everything. And to
mhm.
really get to that place where I could be an all or something. And in our program we talk about just doing it messy, and you can always come back and make it perfect later. But something done well is much better than nothing done at all.
Yeah.
And so this idea of just doing one small thing at a time, like laying it all out and identifying, here's all of the tasks, here's stuff we've already got created, here's stuff that needs to be created, and still moving forward anyways. So for me, the most successful advisors that I have seen when it comes to building out systems and processes are the ones who just go and start somewhere and start building, and then continually use their CEO time to refine those processes. And it's the ones that can just like make that one right next step that tend to move the fastest through process building, even if it's never perfect.
Yeah, no, that's really great feedback. And I think something that I notice a lot on this side too is people will do that. It's like there's this saying like, don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. Like,
Yes.
just it's do what you can. Have you noticed that there's a strong component of when people are when, advisors are trying to do this in their own practices? It's like going to the gym, right? It's like everybody knows that they need to go to the gym. Like most people, if they
Mhm.
want to lose weight, like they know the how, but a lot of the times it's the accountability and
Yes.
other components of our own deep psychology that hold us back from making the changes that we need to do.
Mhm.
Could you speak to that a little bit of like what you've seen work for advisors in terms of, I think nobody's going to disagree that you need processes,
Yeah, right,
but it's
right.
like
But like,
how do we actually start going to the gym, right? Like, how do we
yeah,
actually start implementing this stuff when your hair's
yeah,
on
for
fire or
for
something?
sure. Well, there was a big study done of, I believe it was patients who had had triple bypasses. And so like we're talking life threatening major surgery, like life altering stuff. And they went back and, all of these patients were supposed to change their diet and exercise. So even after a really traumatic life threatening experience, 5 years later, less than 5% of people had actually made a change.
Oh
And
my
that's just
goodness.
how deeply rooted humans are in habit, right? Like we can't expect like, oh, well, Catherine and Libby told me I need to build some processes. So now all of the sudden I'm going to be the process guy and
Yeah.
I'm just going to set aside this time. It never really works. And so the vast majority of advisors that come into our program, it's not that they don't know how to build it. They just want to fast track it. They just want it. And the beautiful thing is this industry is not complete rocket science, right? Like there are already things in place that you can take and make your own.
Mhm.
So for me, it was, I grew up going to conferences and regional events and hearing all these amazing speakers
Mhm.
and like with life changing, amazing ideas. And I'd get back to my office and I'd stare at a blank piece of paper and go, okay, but like, how?
Yeah.
Like, that's a really great idea, but like, how do I actually do that? Like, how do I build an SOP? How do I lay out a high client experience onboarding? Like, how do I actually do that? And so the beautiful thing is there's a lot of programs like mine, like that help you lay it out, that give you the framework, that give you the tools. And it's really just a matter of like, you don't always have to pull yourself up by the bootstraps and figure it out yourself, but
Yeah.
find existing resources that are already available. And sometimes it costs some cash. But for me, I always loved participating in things that had an accountability structure or something that was really big, somebody feeding it to me in little like
Mhm.
spoon fed bites so that I could do it an hour at a time versus being like, okay, I need to take a whole week out of my business and I'm going to
Yeah.
spend that whole week building out these processes because that never actually happened for me, no matter how many times I said I was going to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a big element of, if you can be a part, because I've experienced this being in coaching programs myself, it's
Mhm.
a lot of it is just you need to make the decision to make an investment into yourself and the self improvement and just whatever it is that you're, seeking to fix. And then finding something that's a good enough fit where it's you, like you were saying, like you don't have to figure it out. Like use all of your, mental powder, so to speak, to just, I'm going to commit and I'm just going to follow through. Like I'm just going to implement. And I think so a lot of the work is really just the pre-gaming of, okay, is this program like, I'm at like, where am I? Like, am I point A, point B, point C? Is this something that is point B? Okay, great. Like, I will commit to this to get me to point B and then I can reassess then. Like, I don't need to make a bunch of extra mental noise or like try to reconfigure stuff. And then having that component of like, okay, I'm going to make this investment. Like I'm going, and it's not even like going to buy the treadmill, right? Like I always like using the gym, the gym reference,
Right.
because I think it's a very similar thing, right? Of the things you need to be building in your business and doing, but it's like okay, well, I'm going to hire the coach, or like I'm going to have the physical trainer so that like I have to
Mhm.
show up. Like I'm not going to not show up for this other person. Uh,
Right.
and being
And
able to
especially
build
if I'm
something like that.
paying for it. I have a
Yeah.
gorgeous gym in the basement of my home with all the accoutrements, all the weights, all the equipment. But yet 3 days a week, I still go to a personal trainer outside my house because
Yep.
I need that accountability and I need
Yeah.
somebody else because I like to just show up and she goes, do this, use this weight. Okay, now do this. So there's something about having an outside force that knows what they're doing, just walking you through, and you can kind of, I don't want to say mindlessly, but you just do what they tell you to do and then the results show up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, a big part of it too, when you're trying to do this kind of a thing, something I've realized is, especially if you're running the firm, it's easy to quit on yourself. Like it's easy to say like, okay, I know I needed to like build this lead magnet, or I needed to do this, that, and the other, but I just, it's too crazy right now. I'll do it next week or whatever. And a piece of advice from a previous podcast that somebody gave that I really liked is if you have other people on your team that you can say, okay, I'm now going to make you external person like own this, even within your
Yes.
team, then the accountability is off of you as the person trying to spin all of the plates. But then at the same time, now they've got the feedback mechanism of they know you're expecting them to do it. And then also, it's actually going to move forward because it's not just another, of the million of things that you need to do, running your practice.
Well, and
Falling
to
on
your
you.
point earlier, when we were talking about this idea of like co-creation kind of,
Mm-hmm.
um, when you give something to a team member and you say like, okay, come up with 3 examples for this template and then bring me those 3. So like, I remember we were building a custom house and and my husband would say, okay, like what kind of crown molding do you want? I'd be like, I don't know. What are my options? And he'd be like, I don't know, try the internet. It's like, oh my gosh, I'd get on there and there'd be 4,000 options.
Yeah.
But when we had previously built a home with a builder and they're like, here are your 5 choices, it's so easy for me to go, oh, I like that one best.
Yeah.
Like, could there potentially have been another one out there on the internet that I might have liked a little bit better? Yeah, maybe, but the decision was done and
Yeah.
it was finished, right? So, kind of that same concept, you can still have some control over the process by giving it away and asking them to come to you with 3 different solutions or 2 different solutions, or hey, go research 3 different ways to do this and bring them to me. And then you still get to make the call on how to do that.
Yeah. No, I love that. And that's a process that I think is like an old, like Andy Warhol used this process of like when he had different artists working underneath him.
Mm,
Basically like giving, 10% is the instructions, 80% you let the team do, and then they come back to you for the last 10% of you just saying, like of those 3 that you guys are suggesting, like this one's actually like closer to the vision of where I want to drive things, or like this is more on the brand messaging or whatever it is. And like that, the signature at the end of the painting kind of a thing.
yeah.
Um, having that kind of a process, just it really helps move things along. Cause I think a lot of the times, especially when you're in that scaling, like what I see advisors experience when they're in the scaling process is like, just because there's so many plates that you are spinning, the sooner that you can get other people to help you spin them, even if it's not
Hmm.
perfect,
Hmm.
gives you the mental space to be, okay, I'm not going to get decision fatigue and like trying to figure out options. I'm going to use everything towards like just getting those optimal answers at the end. So I really like that approach.
Well, and it's amazing when you put something on a team member, how they rise to the occasion and
Mm,
they not often just like surprise you, but they exceed your expectations.
mm,
And that's a beautiful thing for everybody, right? It builds confidence in the competency of your team. It builds their confidence, and it gives you as the business owner so much comfort in being able to be like, oh my gosh, like I would have never come up with something that great. Like I was always so pleasantly surprised by my team and the stuff that they came up with, because I'm like, that's way better than I would have thought of, or what I had envisioned. Like I'm glad I gave them some of that creative freedom. And I know on the opposite side of the table, they appreciated that, right? Like they
Mm.
liked a challenge. They loved coming up with something new and creative. They loved exceeding your expectations. And so making sure as a, we talk about that desire to help people develop personally and professionally, and that really being part of your job as a CEO is making sure you're making space for that.
Yeah, no, that's great feedback. And it's something I've actually heard from my team, like on quite a few things I give them I call them special projects. And it's, they really enjoy it. And the feedback I usually get from, like, I had a one-on-one with someone on the team the other day on my side, and she was, it was a one-on-one, and we have like a formal structure for how we do the one-on-ones. And, she gave me the feedback of, I've really been enjoying the special projects because I
Mhm.
like the routine work, but at the same time, I enjoy when I'm like kind of sick of working on something that's a routine project, I can always swap over to one of the special projects for a bit and then come
Right.
back and enjoy the challenge and enjoy the self-education. Because most people do want to grow. Like they don't want to be stagnant, just like a cog in a machine. Like they want to be a co-builder. And they want to know that you see them as a valuable source of insight, and that that's, I think, for people to build an organization where people can find purpose and meaning. It's like they have to have that sense of somewhat of ownership of their work, and challenge to their creativity and being part of that co-creation experience. I think it's just something that's really important to integrate into a happy environment for people. So
For
for
sure.
people that are looking to learn more about the work that you do, Libby, what's the best way for them to find out more about what
Oh,
you
I
do?
appreciate that. Yeah. I mean, if they want all kinds of really easy to implement ideas in their businesses, lots of templates, downloads, they can check out the Efficient Advisor podcast. You can also head out to theefficientadvisor.com. There are oodles and oodles of videos, downloads, all kinds of freebies. And then our next round of our group coaching mastermind cohort launches in January, and we'll be doing signups for that here in November.
Nice. That's great. So for people looking for that, wherever you're encountering this on the internet, it will be nearby those resources that Libby listed. And yeah, any closing thoughts? I feel like we should do a part 2 sometime soon, but any closing
Yeah.
thoughts before we go?
No, I mean, really, before you start building out any process, we really want to think about that process from what is the client or prospect feeling before the process starts? And then what do we want them to be feeling at the end? And then how do we use process to help build that invisible bridge, right?
Mm,
So if they're onboarding with us, they might be coming over and feeling they're excited, but there still might be some trepidation. They have to fire their old advisor that they've been working with. And that's a hard conversation. And gosh, is she really going to make good on all the promises that she said? And is this better deal? And oh my gosh, it's costing more money. And like while they're excited, there's still some trepidation. So how do we create contact with them? How do we make sure that our process is seamless, that they feel so good by the time that their money rolls over, that they're like, oh, okay, I made the right choice. This is amazing. And if we're thinking about every process through that lens of how are they feeling and how do we want them to feel, and then using the process to help them with that transformation, that is kind of to me the core of rooting your processes in client experience.
yeah, no, that's wonderful. So for people who are interested, links will be nearby to get in touch with Libby. And I want to thank you again for coming on the show. I really appreciate, the approach that you take and the message that you're putting out for advisors, because I think it's one that everybody in professional services needs to hear. But I think particularly for financial advisors, it's something that's a really, when taken to heart, is really powerful. So thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me.